Hello, beautiful people of Africa. It's another exciting moment for us to be together to discuss issues of utmost importance that concern the African continent. And our focus this day is on the alliance of Sahel states, particularly Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, looking at how these countries can take advantage or can actually benefit from this confederation that we want to look at how they can, analyze the competitive advantage and intelligence. So today's edition of Global Insight on For You Media Africa focuses on the Alliance of Sahel State, which was formed on the 16th of September 2023, and now Confederation of the Alliance of Sahel State, a new regional alliance formed by the revolutionary nations, as I call them, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. In the course of this program, we're supposed to understand the competitive advantage and intelligence of this league at the time that the African continent is actually becoming more and more attractive to foreign powers. This confederation actually marks a significant departure from their former ties with ECOWAS and a strategic shifter, especially in its diplomacy. This move has been hailed across Africa, with some pundits suggesting that it's a greater milestone toward the complete liberation from the French colonial rule and persistent terror threat supported by the colonial power to keep its influence and geopolitical control in the Sahel. So today we continue to explore the analysis or the competitive advantage of these confederations formed by the Alliance of Sahel States and the implications of this geopolitical realignment in West Africa. What are the prospects for the new development? If you are just tuning in, you're most welcome to Global Insight this day. I'll be taking you straight away to Abuja in Nigeria. We're being joined by OTTO David in his capacity as international security expert. Welcome to the Pan-African Television For You Media Africa, OTTO David.
Yes, thank you for having me on your program. Thank you to your guest for taking the time to listen to this program. So we hope that it is going to be enjoyable, but more so we are thinking about the relevance in terms of the information that is ongoing now regarding the security and geopolitical space within the continent, and how that is quite an important subject, that needs to be discussed. So I'm very glad, to be on this channel and to share my views.
And we appreciate you for accepting our rendezvous this day. OTTO David, just to remind us that Dr. RASHIED PELPUO, who is the president of the African Parliamentarian Forum on Population and Development, will join us subsequently. And I kick off with you, OTTO David. We are looking at the Confederation of the Alliance of Sahel States and looking at how they can gain a competitive advantage that will meet the aspirations of the people of this region and Africa in particular. So let's first of all understand holistically what confederation depicts in the context of the three countries in the Sahel region.
Well, I think, generally, I think it's important to understand that countries have in the past and in the present, formed alliances. So for example, you had the likes of NATO being established as an alliance, the Northern, States Alliance, which included, of course, the likes of the United States, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And then you had other, what you can still call confederations like the Soviet Union. So these are more or less, different countries coming together for perhaps economic interest, to share economic interests for purposes of security, for purposes of, political affiliations, regional bodies, so internationally, we've had the likes of NATO and the likes of the Warsaw Pact, which collapsed, the Soviet Union, which collapsed in the 1990s. Then, of course, you have, organizations like the League of Nations that collapsed, formed the United Nations. So these are all leagues, the African Union, the AU before, the Organization of African Unity before, and then now the AU. So within the global setting, countries come together to establish, these kind of alliances. Within Africa itself, driving down towards Africa, we have, 6 regional bodies, which exist within the continent. For example, we have ECAS, that's Economic Community of Central African States. They are focused more on the economy of, Central African states in terms of the common interest within that region. Then, of course, you have the likes of ECOWAS, which is the Economic Community of West African States. You have, different alliances in the eastern part of the African continent. You have different alliances within the northern part of Africa. So all these alliances, are being established for the purpose of common interest. So it is not surprising that in the backdrop of the military coup d'etats that occurred in the Sahel from 2020, beginning with Mali, then of course Burkina Faso, Guinea-Bissau, and then of course Niger Republic and the likes of that, the backdrop of these countries being suspended from these regional blocs that they belong to. They belong to ECOWAS. So they were suspended from this bloc. And you had them also being suspended from the African Union. So when countries that have common interests, find themselves, being suspended, of course, even globally, you have the likes of the G20, and then, of course, other alliances that have been established to counter that. So it was not a surprise to see that after Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger left, ECOWAS because they were suspended, they said they were leaving ECOWAS. It was just normal that they established some kind of starting from a defense pact, which they call the Alliance of Sahel States. They created an Article 5 replica, which automatically said any attack on one of the states will be an attack on all of the states. This was in reference to the threat that ECOWAS made, that it will use military force to restore the overthrow of President Bazoum in the case of Niger. So you had that alliance being created. And that more or less was some kind of a military alliance. So now in terms of the economy, what these states are doing is that they have now established what they call the Confederation of Sahel States. So it's more or less saying that we are not just only going to defend ourselves against any external threat or against any internal force that threatens the integrity and sovereignty of our states, but we are also going to establish some kind of an economic community, which in this case, would be a confederation. So in my opinion, it's more or less they are just replacing, what the functions of the likes of ECOWAS used to play in the case of the Sahel states. So this is more or less a confederation that is going to deal with the economy of the 3 states, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, the diplomatic relationships that they're having, especially with the fact that all these 3 countries have now kicked out the likes of France. They've asked the United States to vacate in the case of Niger as well. They kicked out the African Union mission that was existing, the UN mission. So this is some kind of, a reawakening of all these states to now establish some kind of an economic alliance. So they are creating the alliance of Sahelian states. And other countries like Senegal, for example, with a new president, is beginning to show some signs of, supporting these three Sahel states. Of course, Senegal is currently a member of the ECOWAS, a key member, and a very strong ally of France before now, perhaps. So the fact that these three countries are having support, from countries like Senegal, is a demonstration that there is some kind of a collapse of the stronghold that countries like France, had on this continent, especially within the Sahel. So it would, be interesting to see what kind of replacements, these countries make. Is it just going to be a confederation of these three states? Are we going to see more states joining them? Are we going to see external geopolitical friends, the likes of Russia, the likes of China coming in to support the capacity and capabilities of the confederation? So it's still growing, and we're still yet to see how that is going to shape out in the nearest future.
Going to shape out in the nearest future, OTTO, David. I think this will actually be on dependent on the strategy that the leaders of these three nations have put together to meet up with the expected objectives or goals set. While listening to your deep analysis regarding topic for discussion this day, and some very peculiar decisions which the leaders of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have taken in line to maybe write a new history for their respective countries, and particularly for the African continent. We want to answer the major question of today: how these countries can capitalize on the competitive advantage and intelligence to solve some of these problems, especially security problems, and also to see how they can use the confederation to bring about a robust in the economy of the respective nations. So what strategies can be advanced to capitalize on these advantages?
Yes, I think it's important to note that working as a confederation, the way that it normally works is that the confederation, of course, is going to be, between the three states for now. When it comes to a strategy in terms of advancing, this now depends on the individual mechanisms and that will be put in place by these three states. It is hugely reliant on the resources that they do have and the support that they can actually gather from not just their population, the people within Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, but also from external parties. Are they going to have friends? I think it's important to note that these countries have the sovereignty, they have the independence, and they are without that. The sole decision makers, should they decide to have an alliance. So there is no question in terms of, whether they should be able to have an alliance or not. Because, of course, this is a matter of, sovereignty and a decision that has been made by these three states. So the question now is, how do they actually go ahead, and initiate maybe their security plan? Now, for example, these three countries have already established some kind of what we call a replica of the multinational joint task force, a standby force that is going to intervene when there are issues of insecurity, especially when it comes to the counter-jihadist operation in the Sahel, which affects all the three countries. So they have to develop a strategy on that. The argument that they've made is that there hasn't been any difference in terms of the capacity and level of attacks that have been happening under the the help of countries like France, the likes of MINUSMA in the case of Mali, the presence of the United States in Air Base 201 in the case of Niger, and also the presence of multinational forces in the tripartite region of the Liptako Goma, which of course is the linkage between Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. So they have argued that all these external forces that have come to Niger and come to Mali and Burkina Faso, it hasn't made any practical difference. So by establishing this kind of an alliance, they are able to kind of counter these forces. But it depends now on the strategy. Are they going to have some kind of a bottom-top approach? Yeah. Is it going to be a people-driven approach? Because of course, security needs to look at the motivational factors. What is motivating people to join? Some of these Sahel-based terrorist organizations that are linked with ISIS and Al Qaeda. Mm-hmm. How are they going to deal with the underlying factors? Do they have enough resources that is able to remove, some of these people that are vulnerable to being recruited from the ground, and to elevate their status in such a way that they do not find these groups to be interesting for them to join? So you've got to look at those kind of interventions. You've also got to look at how do they collaborate. Now, they've complained that the likes of France, were not doing much in terms of collaboration. Some of the regions where the French forces were stationed in the northern part of Mali, even the Malian forces could not have access into this region, which was somehow a detriment to their sovereignty. So now, how are they going to collaborate with the likes of Niger, Mali, or between themselves in such a way that there are no gaps in intelligence, there are no gaps in surveillance and reconnaissance missions? So sure. it has to be a very comprehensive security approach. We haven't seen the roadmap in terms of what is it that they are going to do. Mm-hmm. But what we know is that they are saying that the alliance of Sahel states, the defense pact that they've put together, the establishment of the Confederation is going to be a very powerful starting point for these three states to coordinate when it comes to security. And it is the same, when it comes to issues of the economy, when it comes to issues of diplomacy. Are they all going to align themselves to a particular external party? We know that, for example, in the case of Mali,
that is where the problematic lies.
Yes, go ahead.
Otto David, sorry to interject, but I think this question I'm bringing forward will continue to answer the questions or make for you to make the point. Now, the question is looking at the decisions taken by these revolutionary leaders across the African continent, standing to fight imperialism and neocolonialism and to defend the sovereignty of their respective nation in every sphere. Looking at the Russian Federation, how does the strategic alignment of Sahel states with Russia influence the political and economic landscape of the member countries within the alliance of the Sahel states and its confederation? And what are the potential benefits of this shift or even challenges at a time of increased geopolitical battle in Africa among superpowers, particularly Russia, the United States of America, and France, that is completely losing it?
Yeah, so there are always two sides, when it comes to geopolitics. So on the one side, those who are losing ground, for example, France, the United States, and the Western allies, they regard the establishment of the Confederation of the Sahel states or the establishment of the the Alliance of Sahel States, they see that as an anti-democratic move. Not just that, they, kind of tend to label this approach as, against the will and the wishes of the people. And of course, this is based on the fact that, these countries are on the losing side. They are losing territory, they are losing influence. Perhaps they are also losing a lot on some of the benefits that they accrued in terms of mineral resources within this region. So they are actually, putting forward a narrative, which of course has some level of support within these countries that, we condemn these, so-called revolutionaries because, of course, they took power unconstitutionally. So they're driving this narrative. On the other side, you have these revolutionary leaders, who call themselves, again, revolutionary leaders. They are preaching against the ills of the colonial days. They talk about the fact that countries like France have continuously exploited the country. They've continuously ripped the country of its mineral resources. They haven't seen any benefit in terms of the economy, in terms of the security, in terms of, even democracy hasn't worked. Because of course some of the leaders have overstayed in power. Some of them, have, changed the constitution to allow them to stay in power. Sure. Some of them are unable to, actually deal with the insecurity, and they are using the military and the security services to protect them, and for them to stay in power instead of, actually providing what the wishes of the people are. So this set of leaders, this set of very young leaders, label themselves as revolutionaries, and they are coming up with an alternative. Absolutely. In their regard, they're saying we want to move away from the likes of France, we want to move away from the colonial legacies, and to do that, they are finding new alliances. And I think perhaps the reason why they're finding new alliances is because there can never be a vacuum. So they are leaning towards the likes of Russia, and of course, they are citing the fact that Russia was, in the days of the Soviet Union, very powerful in fighting and contributing towards the colonial wars, helping African countries to fight against colonialism and imperialism. They're saying that Russia and the likes, the likes of China are actually much better in terms of not, really getting themselves into the national, security integrity of the state. They aren't actually concerned with, changing of power, who becomes the next president of the country. So they're having a lot of faith in having alternative support, from the likes of the Soviet Union. But there are people who are saying that it is neither Russia nor the West. Other people are saying that, we should have revolutionary leaders who do not depend on any external powers, because of course some are saying they are all the same. For now, they might be good today, tomorrow they might turn out to be the same. So again, it just depends on how these leaders are analyzing the geopolitical landscape. On the one hand, their argument has been very powerful in saying that, even if we have two bad elements, let us go for the lesser evil and abandon the much bigger evil. So it is a matter of choice between, who is going to work for the benefit of the country at this point in time, and who is going to lose out because they haven't made any beneficial contributions towards the development of the Sahel region. So it's a very fine balance that these so-called revolutionary leaders, are leading. They're talking about some kind of, reinventing or the reinvigoration of, the Pan-Africanism that, has been talked about by the likes of Kwame Nkrumah in the 1960s. Yeah. But let's see what kind of plan they have in terms of sustainability and continuity. Because,
Absolutely.
the truth is that the Western countries, the like of France, the like of the United States, they are not going to go down without a fight. And that
Absolutely, yeah.
means, there will be possibilities of sabotage, within the states. There will be possibilities of, other elements. I mean, just yesterday, I know I'm going out of context a little bit in terms of region.
Yeah.
There were some United States citizens, and Canadian citizens, of course, they are dual nationals who were accused of being amongst, armed men that tried to overthrow
The
the
government in
president
Kinshasa, yeah.
of Democratic Republic of Congo. So, the anti-Western and anti-colonial rhetorics, keep pumping very high. But let's see how the leaders in the continent deal with this in practice.
Which is very imperative what you've highlighted, Otto David, and we're going to continue in the same light. You talked about the fact that the opinion of people across the African continent and across the global world at large. I want us to give a clarification about the decisions of these leaders, because leaders in the Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso being categorical about severing their ties with France and even the United States. Is it to review if they have to enter into other alliances or agreements, the terms, or maybe how can they define their diplomacy in such a way that even in the long run, with the geopolitical landscape changing, they will still be able to have a good diplomatic strategy that will keep the interest of the African continent first before any maybe political interest of leaders.
Yes, I think the advantage that these leaders have is that they are making it very clear, not just to maybe countries like Russia or countries like China. They are making it very clear that they want to see a win-win economic, military, or diplomatic relationship. They want a situation where if one is benefiting, the other must also be benefiting. I mean, they are saying, in other words, that the relationship that they had with likes of France and other Western countries has never been beneficial. It has always been about these colonies. They talk about the fact that they do not have control of their fiscal policies. You have a continent whereby it still uses the old currency of France, of course, which France doesn't use. It is now been backed by the euro. They talk about the fact that the economic and political, but also the language landscape of French, and other languages has been used to control the mindset of the younger generation. So it is a situation whereby one needs to be able to understand that even though they are moving away from the likes of France to the likes of the United States, it is still a situation of how are they going to manage these new alliances, this new, friendship, these new support mechanisms that they've established elsewhere. It is down to some of the contracts, some of the agreements that have been signed before. So I think these are a set of new leaders. Hopefully, they will be able to move away from some of the bad, rhetorics about the fact that, of course, they took power unconstitutionally.
Yeah.
They are not supposed to be in power. They are supposed to hand over power to a civilian-led government. They have to move away from that because, they still face the pressures of the likes of ECOWAS, the African Union, the international community, the International Monetary Fund. All these regional and international organizations will keep putting pressure on these leaders to relinquish power on the basis that they are not democratically elected. So the question that you've got to ask yourself is, if they sign agreements with these countries that they intend to sign agreements with, what happens after they hand over power to a civilian-led government.
Absolutely.
Would that mean that some of these contracts will then be revoked, just like they are revoking contracts that were signed before by democratically elected governments? So what is permanent in these contracts? Does it mean that if, for example, the revolutionary leaders or so-called leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, what if they hand over power tomorrow? What is the implication of that? Does it mean that all these relationships that they've established can actually be revoked? So, you've got to look at the dynamics, not just of what is happening today, but potentially what is going to happen tomorrow in terms of those agreements and those alliances that they're establishing, including the alliance of Sahelian states.
Okay, thank you for that, Otto David. Time to welcome Dr. Rashid PELPUO, who is the President, African Parliamentarian Forum on Population and Development. Doctor, we're going to continue in line with the problematic that Otto David ended with, and it brings us to the political rhetorics in Africa and how can we ensure sustainability in the push to be able to solve the major problems that the African continent is facing, particularly in defending its sovereignty in all spheres, taking the case study of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, should in case they are not at the helm, will their ideology or philosophy be continued to ensure the total liberation of Africa? Hello, Dr. Rashid.
Yeah, Clarice, I thank you so much. And I do appreciate the fact that this is of serious concern and has been subjected to this kind of interaction. We will need to interrogate exactly what is happening in the AES, the new organization formed by these countries, what has compelled it, and why we are going where they're going, where they are going. First of all, the truth is that these countries are fed up with what they expect from ECOWAS and not getting. The failure of ECOWAS is manifested in the coup d'etats that happened, and their failure is concreted by the fact that they couldn't handle the coup d'etat, the coup makers, to the point that they found that ECOWAS itself does not represent the true spirit and consciousness of the African and give the direction where we are going as African people. Essentially, the major problem Africa is facing is not political. It is economic. Our failure to organize ourselves is because we have failed economically to be viable, to be strong, to be in.
Oh, unfortunately. Unfortunately, there's an interruption on the part of Dr. Rashid PELPUO. I will come to you subsequently, just to remind our viewers tuning in that this is Global Insight on For You Media Africa. Hello, Dr. Rashid. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah, I'm saying that our inability to function as African countries, and especially in ECOWAS, as independent, viable countries, is because we are unequal to reflect the true intent of ECOWAS. We are unable to strengthen our various economies to the point that we can be independent and be, able to take care of our people adequately, to avoid all these coup d'etats and dissatisfaction of young people and the misery we see every day and the begging spree all over the continent, where you have lots of our young people, our leaders going to IMF and World Bank to beg for money and to demean ourselves. I think that what the AES has done is a true reflection of what we want in Africa. we cannot continue to be in organizations such as ECOWAS and for them to listen to the West and take decisions for us. We can't continue to be in a situation where in ECOWAS we can have terrorists running down various countries and we cannot help. So you see the ECOWAS country going variously to seek for help, sometimes going to France. Imagine the situation of La Côte d'Ivoire. The France had to move in to bring Ouattara into power. The situation of Mali and Niger, where the Russia has to come in, the Russian private forces have to come in to support them against the intrusion of intrusion of terrorists.
Yes.
So as independent countries coming together with an objective.
We lost him again. I think I'll come to you, Otto David, with the question similar to what Dr. Rashid PELPUO was actually elaborating on. And we're looking at, he made mention of the economic vulnerability of African states, and that's what makes the continent very susceptible, especially to foreign powers. Now, considering the economic vulnerability of these countries, particularly in the Sahel state, where we saw the the insecurity overshadowing the economic progress of the country, what opportunities and obstacles lie ahead of this confederation of states of the alliance of Sahel states in terms of fostering economic development and attracting investment to uplift their population and reduce insecurity?
Well, in terms of the opportunities, it all depends on the plan that the Confederation of Sahelian States members have. They come at a time when, one, they are leaving ECOWAS. They've made it very clear that, they are leaving ECOWAS, even though ECOWAS has asked them to reconsider. So they come at a time when it's going to be more or less a competitive body that would seem ordinarily to other ECOWAS members as a challenge to the existence of ECOWAS. And of course, ECOWAS is also going to be concerned that if it were to annoy any of the members that are left, then it opens up doors for them to simply move to the Sahel Alliance states. So, the opportunities are there, but the challenges are quite huge as well. So it just all depends on the plan. In terms of how that fizzles out in the next couple of months or years to come, I think one of the issues that they will face is funding. How are they going to get funding? But I'm sure that they already have that as a plan, because of course they know the challenges that are being faced. But let's see how it goes.
Indeed, it's about seeing how it goes. And Dr. Rashid joined us again. Dr. Rashid, just to align with what you highlighted earlier on, how can we use, the politics of Africa be redefined to solve the problems of the continent?
Well, the whole concept and idea of Africa has to be redefined. We have failed to understand that Africa cannot run if we are not independent economically. Africa cannot remain fighting politically all our lives. We spend all the time fighting to be independent. We are spending all the time fighting amongst ourselves, fighting corruption. We spend all the time fighting to ensure that there's free and fair elections. We spend all our time trying to ensure that we keep our sovereignty as states, and spend all our time trying to regroup We don't know whether the AU is regrouped only politically or there's a sense in it. So much still needs to happen. No trade is going on in Africa adequate enough for us to have that kind of interaction that will ensure that we don't give ourselves our trade only to the outsiders. No transportation adequacy is going on in Africa. Sometimes you want to travel to one African country, you have to go as far as to France before you can get there, or to another country before you can get back to Africa. I mean, everything doesn't look like we are sure as to exactly what we want. So there's a problem in the whole of the configuration of Africa and the conception of what we want to do. So there's so much room left, and interesting parties are coming in their numbers to take Africa. So it's like this is a continent that people don't know what they want. Europe moves in and take what they want. America moves in and takes what they want. The Chinese and the Japanese move in and take what we want. And we are continually looking like we are underdogs, begging for money, begging for space, inability to rule, coup d'etats here and there, and failed economies here and there. So we have to reconfigure exactly what we need. It is not about the politics. We've gone past these politics when we gain independence. It's not about ensuring stability. It's about production, export, sales, trade. Those are the things that keep economies going. When the US is having problems with China, it's not because of politics. They are fighting because their economic space is being taken by China, and the US is unhappy about it. When the EU is having problems with another country, it's not because of politics. It's because their trade control is being interrupted by another country. But in Africa, when two countries, or when we are having a problem with another country, it's because we feel that somebody, the loans we want to collect, they are not giving us the loans.
Oh, unfortunately. OTTO David, let's try to understand critically this point or this aspect of defining the agenda for the African continent. When talking earlier on, that should be in your first intervention, you highlighted the sanctions meted on the countries of the Sahel states, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso by ECOWAS, and also by suppose Africa's #1 institutional bloc, that is the African Union. Now, faced with the problems, what are some of the contestations that will come as a result of the fact that even the African Union does not, as a body, recognize the milestone or the revolutionary act meted or mended by the leaders of the Sahel states?
Yes, I think you're very correct. I mean, for the African Union, which is the body that is supposed to hold the entire continent together, in a democratic dispensation, they see whatever the Sahel states do as a result of an unconstitutional move. So it's more or less saying that you cannot benefit from a military coup d'etat, irrespective of what you build upon that. The African Union will not recognize the alliance of Sahelian states. It may not even recognize the Confederation because, perhaps for the African Union, it is a product of a military coup d'etat. But it is not up to the African Union to recognize, the alliance of Sahelian states. Again, it is not up to ECOWAS to recognize them, because, of course, becoming a member of ECOWAS, is something that is done, free by a country. So a country can decide that, it wants to leave ECOWAS anytime. It can decide that it doesn't even want to become a member of the African Union. So these are all independent decisions. But I think the challenge that the African Union faces at this point in time is that, despite the suspension that, it meted out on these countries that took power unconstitutionally, they are forging ahead. They are progressing in terms of, how they want to govern their country. So it will be a disappointment for the African Union. But, the truth of the matter is that, the African Union has also failed to take sanctions when, countries, their leaders have, failed to honor the strength of the Constitution by either trying to change the Constitution halfway during or before elections. Some countries have decided to not allow opposition leaders to run free and fairly. Others have been able to, play some very serious tricks on the electoral process to ensure that elections are not free, they are not fair. So the African Union finds itself in a very challenging position because, of course, it still understands that the doctrine of the sovereignty of the state applies. So it cannot intervene in a position where a state makes an independent decision. So it is up to the Alliance of the Sahelian state members to establish some kind of an alliance that is going to benefit the people of those countries. Only the people of Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali can take a decision to say to their leaders, we don't want to belong to any confederation. As long as majority of the people support, and I use the word majority deliberately, as long as majority of the people are seen to support the move of these revolutionary leaders, then of course, it will become the business of the day. But my question has always been, what happens if these leaders are to hand over power to democratically elected leaders? So it then becomes a situation whereby, it's whether this is going to be sustainable or not. So let's watch and see. But for the African Union, their hands are tied. And the last thing that the African Union wants is to see that members begin to leave the Union on the basis that, they are not supporting the establishment of alliances, which, of course, are independent of the decision of the leaders who rule these countries.
And that is where the problematic lies, because we are in a time of, changing dynamics. And I think nations across the globe are re-strategizing to be able to map their own position in the connected world. We know the world at this moment is facing an interconnected problems, and people are strategizing. What is the place of the African Union? Is it about being afraid of, of losing members, or is it about taking those necessary drastic decisions that will defend the sovereignty of the continent as a whole? This actually comes to the question on a memorandum of understanding. I don't know if Dr. Rashid is back. A memorandum of understanding was signed. That should be on the 3rd of December of 1970, which paved a way for the Liptako-Goma Region Integration Development Authority. And I think this is the interception between Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. So now with this, and we know that the fact that Africa is disintegrated is also one of the reasons we are facing the problems you highlighted, Dr. Rashid PELPUO. So now with this memorandum of 1970, how can the African Union as a body align with the philosophy or ideas of the Alliance of Sahel States for the common good of the continent?
Well, it might be strange, but I think that there's basically nothing wrong with this, the formation of IES, I want to see Africa reorganize itself, and the fact that they have done so is a first step towards redefining who they are and moving towards an achievement of a kind that will give them the kind of leverage and respect in the Committee of Nations. So for me, talking about how that is going to have a direct influence on each of them will depend on what targets, what strategies they place before themselves. And I suppose that they should understand the new concept of the world today. They should understand the issues that are playing out and finding Africa in a space that is very difficult for them to operate without being dependent. I like to see them work in a manner that should aim towards real liberation of Africa. I want to see them contradict ECOWAS because ECOWAS is not doing what it professes to do. And they're doing exactly what will help them so other countries can see it. Even when eventually they regroup ECOWAS, they should be able to influence ECOWAS in
We lost him again. You may want to comment on the question, Otto David, looking at how this Memorandum of Understanding of 1970 is important in the decisions taken by the leaders of the Sahel region for the common good of the people of their respective nations, and particular and in general of the African continent.
So I think it's important to remember that again, as my co-panelist mentioned, these countries are independent and they can establish any form of alliance as they so wish, including the alliance of Sahelian states. I think the big question now is how does the alliance progress towards the liberation of the people of these nations away from the stronghold that the colonial states have had on them. I think that's what the ordinary Burkina Faso, the ordinary Malian, and the ordinary Nigerian will want to have as an impact. They want to see, okay, we've established an alliance of Sahelian states. How does this help us in dealing with the insecurity that is ongoing within our country? How does it elevate our economic situation, our social situation? How does it lead to development within the country? So these are some of the very critical questions that these the people of these countries will be asking their leaders.
Yeah.
But also, I think the most important political question is, okay, there is an establishment of a Sahelian alliance, a confederation. How do these leaders want to continue with their leadership? Do they want to remain as military leaders? Do they want to transition into a democratic setting? How long do they want to stay in power? So they've got to ask all these questions, because ultimately, if they decide to engage themselves in any transformative political system, maybe if they want to run as democratic leaders, then of course they then face a different ball game, because if you want to run as a democratic leader, then of course you have to abide by the principles of democracy, which means you need to have an independence of the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. So it will not be a military style of governance. So it therefore means that they have to come up with a plan on how to run a different kind of democracy that is perhaps not aligned to the intricacies of the West. Then how do they manage that with the fact that these countries still depend on the fiscal economy of some of the Western states, They depend on the money, which comes from the West. They depend on some of the assistance that they can get from the likes of the International Monetary Fund. So how do they find alternative ways of running the country or the confederation that will benefit the ordinary man in the street who wants to make sure that they have education, their children can play around without fear of being attacked by terrorist groups or criminals? How do they want to make sure that the economy is in such a way that it can be beneficial for the Liptako Goma region of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger? So it's a huge endeavor, and it has different parts and different compartments that these leaders need to look into very carefully. And those compartments, still depend on themselves. How do they want to continue their leadership? Are they still going to be dressed in military fatigues? Are they still going to be able to, sustain themselves in an environment of fear? Because these military leaders are afraid that, someone else is going to do what they did to whoever was in power before them. Remember the Liptako Goma region has one of the highest number of, military coup d'etats, within that region. Yeah. So the question is, who else are they afraid of, besides ECOWAS? What is the enemy within? Who is planning to take power from them? So it's a huge challenge, that, they are facing ahead of time that moves beyond, even the establishment of the Confederation of States, within the Sahel.
Absolutely. And that is where actually the problematic lies. And I think a better strategy will answer the question if maybe the will of the people or the interest of the people is the reason for the formation of the confederation, for the formation or the decisions taken. It's in line with what the people need. Then I think we're already having the answer that whosoever is at the helm will put the interest of the people first. And we continue to elaborate in the same perspective because, on the 1st of July 2024, the transitional government of the Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso will come to an end. Now the question is, if in case he steps down, what will be the implications on the confederation if the leader that comes in does not actually align with the objective or the philosophy of the Alliance of Sahel States?
Well, I think first of all, he's not going to step down. Come this timetable. There is going to be some level of perhaps this is going to be postponed, or they are possibly looking at taking the shape of Chad. Remember the General Mahamat Idris Jr. took power unconstitutionally from the passing away of President Idris Deby. He established a transitional government and then simply removed his military fatigue and won his civilian, clothing and, represented himself to run as president, and he won. So if these leaders, are considering pleasing the world that sees democracy as the global recognized system of governance, if they want to please the international community, they want to please the likes of the African Union, they want to please ECOWAS, then, of course, perhaps if they also want to please some of the voices within their countries who believe in democracy, I think what is going to happen is they are simply going to, reincarnate themselves as, civilian leaders. They will stand elections, and they will possibly win these elections, and will continue to rule the countries as, military men in democratic settings. So that is what I see as the most likely outcome. But, I think very strongly that these countries, and I'm talking about Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, are going through what I call the consolidation era. The consolidation era is the period in which you take power unconstitutionally, you need to make sure that you stabilize yourself. You need to make sure that you are not threatened by someone else who might want to do the same thing, or maybe a counter coup d'etat. And then once you have established, yourself, making sure that you've consolidated power amongst all the security agencies, then you can move towards the stage of having some kind of an understanding of, how you can transition from, a military leader to a democratic setting. Right now, these countries are not ready for that. They are not ready to hand over power. They are not ready to have any elections at this point in time. So perhaps they're still waiting for a couple of months or so, a couple of years to a point where they can actually believe that, they have the right, atmosphere, they have the right mechanisms, and then they can select at that particular point, to run a democratic system of governance or to transition to democracy, but they will not hand over power. The last thing that someone who takes power by force will do.
Just to add, of course, to what Otto David was highlighting, this shows the complexities of the situations in the Sahel region, particularly in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Should the military government in place quit at this particular moment, what becomes the future of these countries, particularly, and the African continent in general? And it brings us again to the analysis which were made on a country like the Russian Federation during the past elections, that the population overwhelmingly voted their leader, President Vladimir Putin, because according to some of them, it will be unwise to ensure a change in leadership at the time that the continent or the country is facing some sort of security challenges. This was referring to the disagreement between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, and also particularly because it's more of a proxy war at the particular moment. I see you're back with us, Otto David. You may want to continue with the analysis.
Yes, I mean, as I said to you, it all depends on the decision of the people of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, how they want to see the government in place transition. But the truth is that, in order to test that, you've got to have an election. You've got to put up some kind of, maybe a referendum to decide on whether to have these military leaders to stay in power as they are, or perhaps to have them transition or into a democratic setting. But the truth is that they would want at some point to transition into because
phone charger.
That is what they promised. Some of the all the electorates that at some point they will add the process of a transitional government into place. So we are still waiting to see.
I want to charge my phone.
If these governments, are able to.
Please, can you mute your mic, Dr. Rashid? We can get interruption from your end.
But I don't have the thing to.
Dr. Rashid, please. There's an interruption from your end. Can you mute yourself when you're not talking? Thank you. Otto David, please, can we continue?
Yeah, so it all depends, again, as I said, on the people of Niger and the people of the Confederation of Sahelian States, how they want the so-called revolutionary leaders, some call them beneficiaries of coup d'etat. The people have to make a decision, how do they want them to continue ruling? Do they want them to become, to hand over power, to a a democratic leader or democratic, transitional leadership? Do they want them to continue being in power in order for them to stabilize the country? But I think from watching at the body language of these leaders in the Sahel, I don't see any indication that they will want to hand over power to any democratic leader in the nearest 1 or 2 years. I think, right now they're still trying to stabilize their position.
Yeah.
Even when they do decide to hand over power, I see a scenario where they will want to take part in elections themselves. They will want to be elected as democratic leaders, and they will want to continue with ruling the countries on this basis. So that's my prediction. I don't see any other options, from my angle at this point in time.
Just to add that sometimes such decisions are needed to preserve the sovereignty of the country, to prevent the country from going back to the slums. And you know for sure that there is, the geopolitical competition across Africa, particularly in areas that actually harbor minerals that are very important for the other world in court. Coming back to you, Dr. Rashid, praying that all is well with the connection. How can the Alliance of Sahel States now effectively navigate diplomatic engagement with neighboring countries, international stakeholders, and particularly global bodies to promote regional stability and cooperation in the Sahel region under the auspices of the Confederation of the Alliance of Sahel States? Is Dr. Rashid with us, please?
Again. Can you ask your question again?
Yeah, we're looking at how the Alliance of Sahel States can effectively navigate the diplomatic engagement with countries, neighboring countries, international bodies or stakeholders, and in order to promote regional stability and cooperation in the Sahel region that will in turn write a good economic trajectory for the region as a whole.
Well, first of all, I do agree with my co-panelists that they are in a foundational stage of establishing themselves and convincing everybody that what they have chosen is viable, and has value. It should be sustainable, and they should have some confidence in dealing with the system and in dealing with the world. If that foundation stage is not established, it will be difficult to project themselves into the Committee of Nations and to deal with ECOWAS and to diplomatically deal with other countries successfully. Right now, there's still a stream of doubts as to whether what they have done has a sustainable value or not. So essentially, they have a long way to go. They will have to establish themselves very strongly, and they will have to transit into being dependent, on themselves, and being able to convince ECOWAS that this is a different kind of organization, and which is not a rival to them, but which can have a cooperation and understanding in terms of their economic cooperation and political cooperation. ECOWAS is not going to see it easily accommodating them, because that would have meant that other countries can do the same and still go free, and coup d'etats will become an event that should take place by other countries or by other individuals who would have thought that, well, doing a coup can be successful. There's a place to align yourself, and then, being revolutionary is acceptable, and democracy is going to be transgressed, and it will be okay, violating the ECOWAS charter. So, but it is also impossible for them to live without diplomacy, without extending their cooperation with other countries, and without seeing that they are not alone, because no country can exist by themselves without cooperating with others. So it's essential, it's critical, it's part of the transgression into, sorry, it's part of the progression into being independent and being able to, maneuver out of all the intricacies of difficulties that they are facing. So I suppose that the essential thing for them to do is to convince themselves that what they are doing is the best. To go ahead and convince ECOWAS that ECOWAS is not in danger by the kind of confederation they have made. And thirdly, they have to make sure that in extending themselves into the wider world, they should be accepted as an organized body that is not a threat to democracy, that is not a threat to the economic order that is within the space where ECOWAS and themselves exist. So if they are able to go through all this, it is possible for them to use diplomacy to reach any level. Let me warn that with all the things they are doing, they are still not an economic power. They still depend so much on the external. They cannot withstand an aggression, a foreign aggression, when the military is threatened. Even in ECOWAS itself, if ECOWAS is on them, they won't be able to fight on for 1 month with the kind of weapons they have. So the only option left with them is to strengthen their diplomatic links and to strengthen their ability to curve ways into the other countries, and especially ECOWAS. And thankfully, they are looking at Russia as a very good friend. I can see Russia, being a senior brother, can give them the kind of leverage that they would have.
Unfortunately, we lost you again, Dr. Rashid. And of course, I was to bring this other question to you. If you can hear me still, sometimes we say that radical changes necessitate radical measures. Talking earlier on, you highlighted some point as to why the three Sahelian states, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, had to quit the economic bloc of the West African states. And now, from your statement regarding the fact that these leaders or these countries are not yet military strong to face external infringement or attack. So the question this time around is, is it too early to maybe make some conclusions as to how these countries can be able to withstand external threats or threats that have to do with the sovereignty of the respective nations. Now, the question is, how can we put the interest of the continent first? When these leaders left ECOWAS is because of the infringement. Particularly, I know that the funding that was promised by the United States, and also the fact that French has infiltrated some of the countries in the ECOWAS, using it to further expand its sphere of influence across Africa. Actually, one of some of the reasons that led to this drastic decision taken by the leaders of the Sahel region. Now, so what do you think is that right diplomatic move that can actually, impact or bring about diplomatic dynamics in the ECOWAS region, particularly, and in Africa in general?
Oh, well, you have a long question, but my understanding is that how will they be able to maneuver their way into the scheme of diplomacy in Africa, given the situation they find themselves?
They are fighting present-day infiltration.
Yes. I think that it is about, first of all, their individual commitment, as I mentioned earlier, and also about their ability to straight away follow the memorandum of understanding they are working with, and ensure that they stand in a situation where they are needed. If you are a country or an organized group, that does not make yourself indispensable to the needs of others. Your ability to exist doesn't matter to anybody. But where you make yourself independent, you make yourself needed, you can ensure that you are needed, then people move towards you. So essentially, they have to work towards a situation where they establish some kind of indispensability in the way they interact with ECOWAS and the world. They will have to then establish a strong diplomatic cooperation that is going to come without the threat of war or the threat of disruption of economic power.
Absolutely.
And then they have to strengthen the need for them to have what it needs for the West to come to them, rather than what it needs for them to go to the West. They should establish a situation that will compel the West to come to them, to accept them as they are, and to also cooperate with Russia, which is a power willing to go extra length with them in helping them fight against terrorism and in ensuring that they maintain their sovereign positions. So it is a tall order for them. It's important for them also to note that in this scheme, they must move away from ensuring that they are a military power and want to remain so. There must be a transition into a civil rule, which is critical. You cannot depend on military power and travel along with it, because if a military power rules and then that the leader of that military power goes on to fail in continuing his rule, doesn't mean we should go in to take another military power. Power transition must be streamlined, and it has to be done in such a manner that there must be cooperation with the military, with the civilian population. It must come.
I think we should have a concluding statement from you, Otto or David. We have about 4 minutes to be together. I would love to have your comment regarding what Dr. Rasheed presented, particularly on the fact that ECOWAS will be afraid that some countries will follow the example of these countries in the Sahel region and also take some drastic decisions. Do you think we should look at maybe what ECOWAS wants at this particular moment when the sovereignty of the country, especially economic sovereignty of a state, is at stake?
I think it's important to understand that ECOWAS does not want a disruption of the 15-member bloc. Mauritania had left the bloc.
Sure.
They don't want any other member to leave, and this is why, despite ECOWAS suspending all 3 or 4 members of the regional bloc, they then realized that they had made a catastrophic error by promising to launch a military invasion into Niger to restore President Bazoum. That itself had driven these countries to establish this alliance of Sahelian states, which now is being pushed towards a confederation of the Sahel states. So ECOWAS understands that its own action has led to the potential that these members will not return to ECOWAS, and possibly a scenario where these members will then belong to 2 groups, 2 economic groups at the same time, belonging to ECOWAS, while not actually obliging themselves to the regulations of ECOWAS, but also establishing the alliance of Sahelian states. So it's all down to how they want to play this geopolitics, which is ongoing. But I think, from my point of view, I don't see ECOWAS, trying to establish any kind of a military threat against the 3 member states of the Liptako-Goma region. There is no appetite in the region. When you talk to the citizens of this region, there is no appetite for a military confrontation between African states. I mean, it's just a disaster, you know, and it will be catastrophic for African states to confront each other on the basis of some external pressure, either from the West or the East. You know, so I think that, you know, what we are experiencing at this point in time is the military and revolutionary leaders, whichever you want to call them, in Mali and Burkina Faso, looking towards consolidating power dynamics, ensuring that the power structures, you know, are stabilized, ensuring that they can bring some kind of stability within the economic, political, and military, you know, governance within that region. And then, you know, at that point in time, they may now decide if they want to continue as democratic leaders. They may decide to join ECOWAS or rejoin ECOWAS, as ECOWAS has requested them to rejoin. You know, but for now, I think, you know, ECOWAS is panicking. ECOWAS is panicking because, of course, it does understand that there is a potential that other member states who may decide, you know, to launch a military coup d'etat now have friends, you know, in the Sahel that they can simply join them and defend against any possibility that, you know, ECOWAS could launch a military invasion to restore democracy. So it is a big problem for ECOWAS. It is a big problem for the African Union because, of course, the African Union, you know, has, you know, gives the first right of, you know, conflict resolution to regional bodies like ECOWAS and ECAS and the rest. So it's important to note that, you know, it's a very critical time in the history of ECOWAS. But ECOWAS needs to fix its house. You know, it needs to understand that some of the challenges that ECOWAS has faced is that it has kept silent when member states, you know, have changed the constitution, when member states have, you know, used fraudulent means to win elections, when member states have overstayed in power and, you know, locked up opposition leaders, you know, and then ECOWAS does nothing. So if one coup is bad enough, then the other must also be bad and must also be condemned. So as long as ECOWAS does not, you know, play the game of neutrality, if they don't play the game of one standard instead of double standard, then I think ECOWAS will face a huge challenge in years to come in terms of its membership.
That can transcend to the African continent as a whole. Maybe this will be a milestone towards bringing that drastic reform that the African Union has as a body. Thank you so much, and do have a lovely time in the company of Program Son for You Media Africa.
Thank you, Robin.